Welcome back. As tensions escalate between Israel, Iran, and global powers, questions about media narratives, political influence, and public perception have intensified. In this investigative documentary, we examine the complex relationship between geopolitics, media coverage, and public opinion. From the strategic messaging surrounding military operations to the role of lobbying, diplomacy, and historical narratives, this report explores whether global audiences are receiving the full picture. This documentary does not take sides. Instead, it examines the evidence, historical context, and perspectives shaping one of the most consequential geopolitical confrontations of our time. Tonight's investigation begins with a simple question. In moments of war, crisis, and international confrontation, how much of what we see in the media reflects the full story? And how much reflects narratives shaped by politics, alliances, and strategic messaging? Throughout modern history, media coverage has played a decisive role in shaping public perception of global conflicts. From Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan, journalists, analysts, and historians have repeatedly asked whether governments and institutions sometimes guide the narrative presented to the public. Now, as tensions between Israel and Iran intensify, similar questions are once again emerging. Not just about the war itself, but about how the story is being told and who controls the narrative. In late February 2026, an article published by CNN highlighted an unusual dimension of the latest escalation between Israel and Iran. The report examined the timing of Israeli military operations and their symbolic connection to the Jewish holiday of Purim. Purim commemorates a story from the biblical book of Esther, set in ancient Persia, the region historically associated with modern-day Iran. According to the tradition, the Jewish people were saved from a plot to destroy them during the Persian Empire. For many Israelis, the holiday represents survival in the face of existential threats. In a speech referencing this historical story, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu invoked parallels between ancient Persia and modern Iran. The symbolism was powerful, but it also raised important questions. When religious or historical narratives are invoked during modern military conflicts, how should they be interpreted? As cultural symbolism, political messaging, or strategic rhetoric aimed at mobilizing support? Throughout history, political leaders have often used historical narratives to frame contemporary conflicts. From the Cold War to modern counterterrorism operations, references to past struggles frequently appear in speeches designed to rally domestic audiences. But experts warn that such narratives can also deepen divisions. When conflicts are framed as civilizational struggles, it can shift the conversation away from diplomacy and toward confrontation. In the case of Israel and Iran, tensions have been building for decades. Israel views Iran's nuclear ambitions and regional influence as a potential existential threat. Iran, meanwhile, views Israel as a strategic rival backed by Western powers. The result is a geopolitical rivalry shaped not only by military capabilities, but also by narratives. Narratives that resonate deeply with history, identity, and national memory. But the story does not stop with governments. In democratic societies, media organizations play a central role in informing the public. Major outlets such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Fox News reach millions of viewers and readers every day. Their reporting shapes how people understand international events. And during wartime, the responsibility becomes even greater. However, critics argue that media coverage of Middle Eastern conflicts often reflects political alliances as much as journalistic investigation. Some analysts claim that certain narratives receive extensive attention, while others receive less coverage. Others argue the opposite, that media organizations are frequently criticized by all sides precisely because they attempt to balance complex and competing perspectives. The truth, as always, may lie somewhere in between. Another factor often raised in discussions about U.S. policy toward Israel involves lobbying. In Washington, lobbying groups representing many different countries and interests attempt to influence policymakers. One of the most prominent pro-Israel lobbying organizations is American Israel Public Affairs Committee, commonly known as AIPAC. Supporters argue that such groups represent legitimate political advocacy within the democratic process. Critics argue that lobbying influence can shape foreign policy decisions in ways that do not always reflect public opinion. In reality, lobbying is a standard part of Washington politics. Countries around the world, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Turkey, and others, maintain active lobbying efforts in the United States. The broader question, therefore, is not whether lobbying exists. It is how much influence it ultimately has, and whether the public fully understands that influence. In recent years, polling data has revealed a shift in American public opinion regarding Middle Eastern policy. Younger voters in particular appear increasingly divided on questions related to Israel, Palestine, and regional conflicts. Some polls suggest growing skepticism about continued military aid. Others show strong support for maintaining the long-standing U.S.-Israel alliance. This divide reflects a broader transformation in how Americans view global engagement. After 2 decades of war in Iraq and Afghanistan, many voters across the political spectrum express fatigue with foreign military interventions. That sentiment is now shaping debates about Iran and about the future of American involvement in Middle Eastern conflicts. As the Iran-Israel confrontation continues to evolve, one reality becomes increasingly clear. This conflict is not only about missiles, alliances, and military strategies. It is also about narratives, about how history is remembered, about how political leaders frame their actions, and about how the media presents those actions to the world. But the deeper we look into these narratives, the more complicated the story becomes. Because behind every headline lies a much larger geopolitical struggle. And in part 2 of this investigation, we explore the growing divide between political institutions, media narratives, and public opinion in the United States. A divide that may shape the future of American foreign policy. Over the past decade, surveys have shown a steady decline in public trust toward major news organizations. Many Americans believe media outlets have become politically polarized. Some accuse outlets of favoring certain geopolitical narratives. Others argue the opposite, that media institutions remain essential watchdogs holding governments accountable. This debate intensified during conflicts in Iraq, Syria, and Gaza. Now it is emerging again in the context of tensions between Israel and Iran. Modern conflicts are fought on multiple fronts: military, diplomatic, economic, and informational. Information warfare, sometimes called narrative warfare, has become a defining feature of 21st century geopolitics. Governments invest heavily in shaping how events are perceived globally, through official statements, through diplomatic messaging, and sometimes through strategic communication campaigns. This is not unique to any one country. Nearly every major power participates in some form of information strategy, from Washington to Moscow, from Beijing to Tehran, and from Jerusalem to regional capitals across the Middle East. One of the most subtle but powerful tools in media coverage is framing. Which facts are emphasized? Which voices are amplified? Which images appear on television screens? The answers to these questions can influence how audiences interpret complex conflicts. For example, civilian casualties, tragic in any war, often become the emotional center of global reporting. But coverage may vary depending on the political alliances involved. Some critics argue that certain civilian tragedies receive extensive coverage, while others receive less attention. Media organizations, however, insist they operate under the constraints of access, verification, and real-time reporting challenges. Again, the reality is rarely simple. For the United States, the Israel-Iran confrontation presents a difficult strategic dilemma. Israel has been one of America's closest allies in the Middle East for decades. At the same time, the United States must manage relationships with numerous regional actors, including Gulf states, Turkey, and emerging diplomatic partners. Escalation with Iran carries enormous risks. Military experts warn that a direct conflict between Israel and Iran could rapidly expand into a broader regional war. Such a conflict could involve Hezbollah in Lebanon, militia groups across Iraq and Syria, and disruptions to global energy markets. For Washington policymakers, the stakes are therefore extremely high. Meanwhile, public opinion continues to evolve. In democratic societies, foreign policy decisions ultimately face scrutiny from voters. Protests, debates, and political campaigns increasingly reflect disagreements about the future of American involvement overseas. Some argue that supporting allies like Israel is essential for maintaining global stability. Others argue that the United States should reduce its role in foreign conflicts and focus on domestic priorities. This debate is likely to intensify as geopolitical tensions grow. As we step back from the headlines, one lesson becomes clear. The relationship between media, politics, and international conflict is extraordinarily complex. Journalists attempt to report events in real time. Governments attempt to advance national interests. And audiences attempt to make sense of it all. But the search for truth in wartime has never been easy. Perhaps the most important responsibility lies not only with institutions, but with citizens themselves, to question, to verify, and to seek information from multiple perspectives. Because in a world shaped by powerful narratives, understanding the full story requires more than just watching the news. It requires asking deeper questions. If you found this investigation valuable, consider supporting independent journalism. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others who want a deeper understanding of global events. Because informed citizens are essential to a healthy democracy, and the search for truth never stops.